Yes, this is John G. Sutton. Tales from the Jail. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about a page from history, yeah, of an escape from Strangeways prison, yeah, which took place quite a long time ago, actually. And I'll tell you a little bit about this guy. Uh, it started really around about 1879 when, this is a long time ago, as I said, when a villain, a notorious murderer, robber called Charlie Peace was executed at Armley Jail in Yorkshire. He was hung by the neck until he was properly dead. But Charlie Peace was notorious and he had quite a following. They used to publish stories about the adventures of Charlie Peace, so he was a bit of a character, also a murderer. And he was hung, and one of his followers was a man called John Jackson, who was subsequently following in the footsteps of Charlie Peace because it was his hero, you know. And he set about robbing people and generally stealing stuff, breaking into people's houses, and eventually got himself locked up. First of all, locked up in Armley Jail in Yorkshire. Then he got himself banged up in Wakefield, 6 months at a time, you know. And then then he came to the Greater Manchester area, and in Oldham, I believe it was, he got himself arrested for robbery and was sentenced to 6 months hard labour at Strangeways. Now, in Strangeways, they used to have a thing called the crank. Yeah, I don't know if you know what the crank is, but let me tell you, it's like an old-fashioned, what they used to do, a mangle, you know? It's got a handle on it, and you turn the handle like that. And that was one of the things that you had to do when you were sentenced to hard labour. You might have to do 1,000 turns of the mangle a day. And there was a number calculator on the side of the mangle, on this crank, yeah? And on the top of it, there was an adjuster that was a screw, and it was done by the staff who had an instrument to tighten or to lessen the amount of tension that was required to actually turn the crank, yeah? And that is why prison officers are called screws, because they adjusted the screw on the top of the crank. So when you get somebody called, he's a good screw in, you know, he'd lessen off the tension so you could actually spin it round fairly quickly and do your number of turns of the crank, because you had to do so many a day and it was noted down. Let me tell you this, if you didn't complete the number of turns that you were doing, you get sentenced to like 3 days bread and water. Imagine that. We haven't got the strength to turn the crank, so we've got a cure here. We'll give you 3 days on nothing but bread and water. And it used to be a pound of bread, yeah, and as much water as you needed. But that, and you would get that in your cell instead of actually being fed normal prison food. Porridge being a standard staple diet for breakfast, which they're serving to Strangeways to this very day. So if you happen to get yourself banged up, expect to get some porridge. Seriously. Anyway, I'm talking about an escape from Strangeways, yeah? John Jackson, who was by trade really a gas fitter and a plumber, when he was in Strangeways doing his hard labour, he was put about to work on the works department, and he was sent out to do various little plumbing tasks around the prison. And inside Strangeways prison at that time, there was people actually living in the prison who were not prisoners. As you go through the gate, the main gates on Southall Street, yeah, the old Victorian big iron and oak gate. When you go through that gate, straight through, then there's a little, like an entrance unit, yeah? You go through there, through the iron gates, turn left, and on the left, there are a number of buildings on the left that when I was there, we used as the gymnasium, or part of the gymnasium, a training unit where they did weights and all that. Subsequently built a proper sports hall, sports unit, yeah, outside that. But when I first went there in '75, that was where they had the weights and did circuit training and all that. But anyway, we go back to the 1880s. That was the home, that was the house that was lived in by the matron, because they had a matron there, you know, who did like medical stuff and all that, yeah. And her name was Mrs. Little. And she lived there, and she had developed a cook had developed a gas leak. So they sent for the works department, or whatever they called them in them days, and a warder called Webb went with them went with this man, because they dispatched John Jackson with a member of staff to actually repair the gas leak. It took him a number of times to actually try and get it fixed, and eventually on the final day that he was working on it, Webb was sat downstairs, I suppose, probably reading a newspaper or having a cigarette or whatever it was he was doing in those days, or a cup of tea with Mrs. Little, and she heard all this noise upstairs and alerted Webb, the jailer, to go running up. And I believe he was a big, hefty guy, this. Ran up, and what happened next was a terrible noise, rattling, banging, and clattering, and Mrs. Little ran up and found Webb had been murdered. He was on the floor, blood pouring from his head, and he'd collapsed. He wasn't quite dead. They managed to get the doctor from the hospital inside Strangeways to come in and examine him, and he didn't know what had happened. And within a minute or so of being discovered, he had died. And John Jackson, who idolised Charlie Peace, wanted to do the same kind of thing that Charlie Peace had done. That's escape from prison, which is exactly what he did. He broke through the roof on the top of the house at the side of the wall and smashed through the tiles, climbed onto the top of the roof and got himself over the wall, dropped down into Southall Street and did a runner. And apparently he was on the run for a few months and terrorised Manchester because he was breaking into places, stealing things, and there were sightings of him all over. And John Jackson, yeah, was eventually caught and taken to Strangeways, where he was subsequently, but he was convicted, yeah, of murdering Webb at the Manchester Crown Courts, and he was sentenced to death. And he would have been in the condemned cell on B Wing, B1, right at the end. And the hangman was a man called John Berry. Yeah, I haven't done any research into John Berry, but he was the hangman who took John Jackson to the execution chamber, and he was hung by the neck until dead. And then his body was buried within the prison walls. Now, if you go through, as I said, through the main gates at Strangeways, turn right and go straight up to the top. Right at the top, there is now, if you look on Google Earth, yeah, look on Google Earth, you can see there's a green patch there, a grass. That is where the bodies were buried, at the side of the wall, right at the top on the right-hand side. And that's where John Jackson was buried. I believe he's been disinterred now and taken away to another burial spot. and placed there, because originally the decision of the court was that he would be buried in what's known as unconsecrated ground. I've got another story about an escape from Strangeways that doesn't involve murder. It involves trickery and a very smart villain who I will be discussing in one of my future installments. I hope you've seriously enjoyed this. Tales from the Jails. We've just gone back into Victorian times, and the criminal was called John Jackson. You can look him up on Google, and I sincerely hope that you've enjoyed this. Thank you very much.